Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to my channel. In our previous tutorial, we introduced the chaos destruction system and I walked you through making your static meshes fracture ready. In this session, we will dive deeper into the basics of chaos, covering selection tools, edit tools, clusters, and optimization tips. By the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to fracture your assets in your scene with ease. Without any further ado, let's get started. Here I am inside the editor. I'm using the exact same level that I used in my previous tutorial. Let's do a quick recap. In the previous tutorial, we talked about generate, how to create geometry collection so the actor is breakable. Then we talked about the types of fracture that we have in chaos destruction. We went over them one by one and discussed some key properties. And then we went back to the geometry collection, and under physics we talked about damage threshold, how easy that is for these pieces to break apart. Let's put together a very simple destruction scene. I'm using uniform. Let's go 10 by 10 with a little bit of purlin noise and fracture. I'm going to select my geometry collection and fracture. And in level 1, if I go and select all, you can see I have 10 bones ready to go. Let's go one level down. I'm going to use cluster this time. And for min and max number of clusters, Voronoi, I'm going to choose 8, the default, using the same purlin noise, selecting the entire geometry collection, and I'm going to fracture again. And I'm receiving an extra 76 bones in my level 2. So I've got 10 bones, initial bones in level 1, and an addition of 76 bones on level 2. Now, why I keep talking about these? Because, well, when it comes to selection, understanding how the hierarchy works is quite important. Now I don't need to fracture anything any further. I've got 2 levels. And by the way, if you want to navigate through your levels using the hotkey on your keyboard, Shift W and Shift S are the ones that you use. So Shift W going to level 2, level 1 and root, and then Shift S to go to level 1 and level 2, and it gets reflected in your fracture hierarchy as well. Also, if you would like to explode each level, of course you can use this, or you can use Shift E for explode to explode your level. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and simulate the level. You can see these pieces break apart quite easily. That's fantastic. Let's get to selection, because now we have enough pieces to talk about selection. I'm going to zoom in. You select your geometry collection. I'm going to go in here, select the geometry collection. Now, if you select all, you select all of the bones in your level. That's fairly straightforward. If you would like to select multiple bones, you hold down Control and you select multiple pieces, and then you can fracture only those for your next level, in my case level 3. Invert is going to invert the current selection and invert the selection to all the unselected bones. That one was also easy, and of course none is a no-brainer. You either click away or you click at none to deselect all the bones. What about parent? If you select a bone and you want to get to its parent, in my case, bone number 42, that belongs to bone number 4 coming from level 1, you just click on parent and it's going to select the parent bone, and you can now fracture this one only. What about children? With this parent selected, you can go and select children, and it's going to select all the children, in this case on my level 2, that belongs to that parent. In this case, parent number 4. Sometimes you have more than 1 or 2 levels, sometimes you have 5, 6 levels, and one child can have multiple siblings, multiple parents. To get to those, you just go and select siblings. In my case, it's the same as children, but if you have more than 1 or 2 levels, chances are you get those, and you can actually identify those using siblings. If you want to get to the whole level, selecting all 10 bones or all 76 bones, in my case, you use level. So if I select something that belongs to the second level, you can see I'm not selecting any of these blue ones. I'm selecting number 70 that belongs to number 7. This number 70 comes from level 2. If I select level, it's going to select all these 76 bones that I have on my level 2. Very, very useful. Also, the one that I use a lot is contact. Let's say I'm selecting again one of these bones and I want to highlight and also select all the bones that come in contact with my selected bone. In that case, I'm going to click on contact, and it's going to select all the bones that are contacting or touching this selected bones in any form of shape. You can see some of these come from the bone number 6, some of these come from bone number 7. I'm going to intentionally skip over leaf and cluster. We haven't talked about cluster yet, so we'll leave that for later. I will talk about interactive. And interactive is very useful in particular because if I select interactive, mouse selection method is set to rectangle select. This means that I can do a marquee select here and say select these bones and fracture these bones furthermore. So I can go with that selection, go to uniform again. I'm going to lower that because of course I'm recording as well. I don't want to introduce too many pieces. With a little bit of noise, I'm going to fracture, and as a result of that, I'm generating an addition of 51 more bones into my scene. Anytime you produce any level, it's always a good idea to select your geometry collection, go straight into physics rollout and have a look at your new index. So index of 2 links to level 3, still very, very low. I can actually crank it up or practically set it to something like 5, guaranteeing that it's going to break that easily. So with that out of the way, I'm going to fracture, and you can see I'm generating far more pieces. So that was a quick look at selection and how to select your pieces if you have a particular strategy in mind to select a number of bones and to fracture them further. That's how you use this select menu. Let's go to the next chapter and talk about edit. The next rollout that we are going to explore is edit. Now, fracture mode includes editing tools to allow you to remove unwanted bones, or as we call it, fractured pieces, from the geometry collection hierarchy, as well as hiding or unhiding specific bones. And these tools streamline the workflow, especially when dealing with complex fracturing in geometry collection that we are going to explore hopefully in the near future. So let's zoom in and explore some of these. The first one is prune, and this tool is useful when you want to prune or remove any selected bone from the hierarchy. So if I go into my hierarchy and see what I'm selecting here, I might actually select something like number 66, this one right here, so the silhouette changes so you guys can see that. With that selected, I'm gonna go prune, and you can see that piece is now being removed. It is actually quite useful because you cannot just manually remove a piece by pressing delete. If I press a delete button on my keyboard, I'm removing the entire geometry collection. So I would say that is the only way that you can basically go ahead with removing individual pieces from your hierarchy if need be. So if you do your simulation and you realize one piece looks redundant or just doesn't work with the scenario that you have in mind, prune is your friend. I'm going to undo and get back to it. Also, you can temporarily hide or unhide a bone. So this visibility tool only removes it from the viewport, not the simulation. So I can go ahead, I don't know, select these set of children, these set of bones, and I can easily go hide. If I want to unhide them, I have no choice but to have my fracture hierarchy open. I select the hidden bones and simply click unhide, and I'll bring them over. Sometimes you realize during your simulation that, wouldn't that be nice to have, let's say, I don't know, this piece and this piece as one piece? Well, you have geometry merge. You can see I am selecting number 58 and 61 that belong to my number 6 parent bone. I want to merge these two. Select these two and click on merge. And all of a sudden, this piece is now 58. So very, very useful if you want to sort of art direct your pieces in a way that, yeah, this is just too small or this piece doesn't really fit with what I have. Then you go and easily merge those. So although we don't deal with too many commands or tools in the editing section, I still find these guys, especially prune and geomerge, very useful when it comes to your selection. When you're inspecting your selection pieces and you want to do further tweaks, it really doesn't change your level. It somewhat optimizes the way that you work, and it allows you to fine-tune and tweak your end result even further. Now, with that out of the way, let's go to the next chapter and talk about clusters. Let's talk about clusters and how can we benefit from them in optimization side of things and within our workflow. You use clusters only when you finish with your fracture. What does that mean? It means that I need to fracture this piece. I already have geometry collection for it. I'm going to go into uniform. Let's say 50 pieces that I would like to create with a little bit of noise. I'm going to select the geometry collection, fracture. All right, that gives me 44 pieces on my level 1. But what if I want to have some sort of a main group? Let's say I would like to have 3 pieces as my main sites, as my main pieces, and then those can be broken down into the rest of level 1. You may have noticed in this particular scenario, I'm not really fracturing anything. I'm trying to change the distribution of my pieces within the number of pieces that I have introduced. So what I can do in this case is to select my geometry collection, all of it, and go cluster auto. It's going to automatically group my clusters into the specified number of sites. You can see the cluster size method. It's set to by number, and it says, all right, you have 44. How many categories, how many groups, how many containers you would like to create? And you can basically place your level 1 into those groups. You can also control the connectivity of the groups that you create. You can enforce site parameters, and that is going to sort of match the site parameters for those pieces. I always leave that on. And avoid isolation is going to make sure that you're not going to end up with one cluster and one child. So I tend to leave those on unless I have a very specific scenario. Cool. With everything selected, I'm going to go auto cluster. Now look what happens. It's going to create a level for me with 3 number of bones only, and it's going to push down what we used to call level 1 to level 2. So I have a category of 3 main pieces which I can break, and only then it goes to 44 bones that I have on my level 2 without fracturing a single bone. To prove that, I can go into threshold, and you probably know where I'm going with this. I can specify a very low threshold for my cluster level 1, and I'm going to specify a very high threshold for my level 2, so I can only see the 3 clusters that I just created. I'm going to click away and simulate, and there I have my 3 pieces. Out of those 3, now I can lower the threshold on my level 2 and break even more pieces. So I'm going to lower this to something like 5,000. And now, if I click away and simulate, I should have all those pieces breaking down. Hope that makes sense. Extremely useful when you want to group number of cluster sites, and that gives you a very fine control over how many clusters you're creating and what you want to do with your clusters, which eventually change the grouping and distribution of your bones or your fractured pieces. Now let's talk about magnet cluster. Magnet cluster creates bones cluster by grouping all the connecting bones. This is a fundamental difference between this and auto cluster, where the system automatically picks and generates specific groups for you. You can actually say, I want these connected bones to be part of a group, part of a cluster. I think to explain this better, I have just a plane, and I'm going to introduce radial fracture, because radial fracture has got very clear connected bones and makes it a lot easier for me to show you. I understand that this fracture is not the prettiest. I haven't really tweaked much, but it is going to get the job done. So I'm going to fracture, and you can now see that these, if I cancel out, these guys are considered connected bones. Now, if I, let's say, I'm going to select these guys, hold down Control, selecting this ring right here, and go to magnet cluster. Magnet cluster has got a very important property, and that is iterations. It says, what you have selected, I'm going to select all the connected bones to that as my first iteration. So technically, I should be able to get these guys also in that cluster, in that group. If I increase that to 2, then it's going to go 2 rings. It's going to say, all right, I'm going to connect these guys also to that cluster. If I go 3, it's going to include these guys to the magnet cluster as well and creates a level for it. It's that simple. So I'm going to select the first one and I am going to select only these rings and go cluster magnet. It's going to generate a new cluster, level 2. And if you have trouble seeing this, you can always go to fracture level. Remember, Shift S and Shift W. And I'm going to go to my level 2 and you can see what I have selected initially. I also have an extra ring to that as well. If I cancel out and undo, go to the same situation that I had and go into all levels, and this time select these guys, magnet, and increase that to 2 cluster, and go and view my second level, you can immediately see that out of this selected region, I have now 2 connected bones selected and stored in the magnet cluster. That is really it. I can now cancel out, go to all levels with this guy, and I can simply go ahead and tweak my threshold. So for my level 1, 30 pieces, I've got 5,000, so it's going to guarantee that it's going to break. For the second one, I can crank it up to something like 50,000. So some of these newly generated clusters can break and some others may not break. So we'll see how that is going to look. And I'm going to select the object, Shift B to hide the colors and play. It cracks, but it doesn't really do anything because this, I guess, is right at the center. I'm moving it ever so slightly closer so we get to see all the pieces and simulate. And now you can see while these pieces broke so easily, my cluster, because of the high damage threshold, may not break apart that easily. And again, it's up to you. How do you want to change that? You can kind of crank it up to a very, very high number. And if I now simulate, you can see these guys are not going to break. The rest of these pieces are going to break. Hopefully that makes sense with magnet cluster, because I've noticed that there is plenty of confusion about magnet and how this works. It all comes down to connected bones. And I thought, well, this explains that clearly. The next one is called flatten. The way it works is actually fairly simple. It removes the middle level of your destruction hierarchy. So I have level 1 and I have level 2. If I go ahead and select this guy, pretty much all of it, and go flatten, it's going to remove level 2, and then I'll end up with 44 bones. If I just undo that ever so slightly, you can see it actually completely removes the initial auto cluster that I applied and just flattens that. So I have level 1 with 45, the original, and now I can play and see the simulation happens. Simple as that. Next is cluster and uncluster, and they work hand in hand. Let's say I'm going to select pieces, some pieces here. I'm going to select these guys, and I want this to be a cluster. You can totally pick what you want to have as a cluster. I'm going to say cluster, and it's going to remove them from level 1 and adds that to level 2. To see it clearly, I can go to damage threshold and say, with the first level, the original level, I want things to break so easily. But with my second level, which is index 1, I want to crank up this value really high and say, do not break this piece that I just clustered. If I play, you can see these selected bones, these guys are not going to break, whereas the rest of them broke very easily and quickly. You can undo that. You can just say, you know what, I made a mistake, that didn't really look good, I'm gonna uncluster it. And it's going to remove that level 2, adds it to level 1, back to the drawing board, business as usual. Now, there's another way to reduce the number of levels that you have, and that is to move the selected bones from the higher level into the hierarchy. And that is level up. So let's say I'm going to select some of these connected pieces. If I can select this little guy here as well. And just, this I want to be a cluster. It's going to create level 2 for me. If I go into my fracture hierarchy, I should be able to see those. You should see that I have my entire level 38, and then I have the newly created level 2, which that includes only 7 selected pieces I just selected, pieces that are now in level 2, and pieces that I generated using cluster. But let's say I want to move them up, level them up. I'm going to select these children from my fracture hierarchy, and I'm going to say level up. And it's that easy. It removed the parent, moved everything back to where it was using level up. So it's simply moving bones to a higher level of my hierarchy. That simple. Now the other one is merge, which is also extremely useful. So I'm going to actually go ahead with another fracture. I feel brave today. So 5, 5, fracture to introduce a brand new level with more bones. You can see 84 out of that original 45 that I have, including which you can see in your fracture hierarchy. But let's say throughout the process, I just realized that, perhaps that was a bit too much. How about I just merge 10, 6, and 5, these guys together. You just select them simply and go merge. Now it is going to merge those and puts them into your hierarchy. So if you feel like you need to connect some of these and somehow you made a mistake, you feel like, that was a bit too much, I shouldn't have done this, you can easily reduce the number of groups on your selected level by just merging them. So I'm going to select these 3, 20, 18, and 35, and I'm going to hit merge. All right, at this point, I feel like I talked about different options within chaos destruction, but we haven't really talked about materials. How to set materials, how to manage materials, how to put internal separate materials, so on and so forth. So let's talk about that in this chapter. Now, first things first, you need to look into that through your geometry collection. So you can see I have geometry collection on my level. Also, I have geometry collection in my content drawer. So for the rock, I can load up my geometry collection and scroll down to materials right here. You can add an array and say, I would like to have secondary material. If I go to my content browser, let's say inner mat is what I'm looking for. I'm going to add inner mat, or you can select that and click on this button to apply the selected actor to here. That's all good. I'm going to save. And now when I fracture this piece, I'm going to go to uniform and let's say fracture 50 by 50, I have material and the internal material is set to automatic. I can go and pick inner mat and fracture. If I go to selection and have a look at my simulation, I should have now the new material that has been assigned to the inner surfaces. It's that simple. But let's say, I'm going to go in here, let's say I don't have this, or for whatever reason, I forget to have this inner material in there. So let's go and select index 1 and delete it. So let's say we don't have that. There's another way to apply material to the chaos mesh, but the downfall would be you have to do that every single time you bring it into the scene. The method I just showed is going to bake that permanent into this mesh, so any instances that you bring will carry over that mesh. If you don't have that, it's still not a problem. If I go into fracture, you can see in here I have only the default material. I can go into the utilities, which we haven't talked about until now, and go into material. And I'm going to say add a material slot for this instance only. So I'm going to go add material, and I'm going to select again my inner mat. And with that, if I click away and fracture, you can see it will come along. Now, what if you completely forgot about the first method and the second method, and only after the fracture you realize that you needed to add a material? Because you can see in both methods, with the geometry collection I'm doing even before fracture, and for the second one I'm doing within the fracture. When I'm doing the fracture, I'm going to go ahead and add the material utilities. But what if you want to change it after the fact? Well, I already have an example that my fracture is there. I want to change this type of material to something else. What else do I have? I have this white mat, so let's apply that instead. How can we do that? Well, you select all of your pieces, you go into material again. This time I'm going to select white, I believe was the name. And now I'm going to go into assign material rollout. It says assign material, index 0 or 1. I have index 0, which is the default material. Index 1 is the white material. I want index 1 to be applied to only internal faces and only selected bones, which in that case, if that's ticked, you have to make sure to select all of that through select rollout. That's it. Assign material. And that should really do the trick for us. If I cancel out and now re-simulate, I should be able to see the white material. Looks like coconut, but that's still okay. All right, that should do the trick for material. So let's go to the next chapter and talk a little bit more about optimization side of things, and we can wrap up this tutorial at this point, and we have another tutorial on chaos destruction coming up. So if there is anything left, we can talk about that in the next tutorial. Let's go to the next chapter. Now let's talk about utility rollout in our last chapter of this tutorial. I'm not going to go over all of them simply because, well, there is no scenario that those particular tools can be applied. Just so you know, we've got Auto UV, which allows you to auto-generate a brand new UV for your chaos geometry collection. You can specify what type of resolution you would like to apply to what. You can specify UVs for internal, external, or all faces, and with that specify the resolution for your UV map. You can go ahead and add UV channel and say, okay, I have UV 0 and I want to put those UVs into channel 1 for whatever reason. You can UV layout, which is going to immediately project a UV planes on top of this and bake those textures if you want. Something that I honestly not interested at this point, because I would like to think whatever you bring has got UVs and proper textures in it. I highly encourage you to do so and not to use auto UVs after the fact, because you may run into some discrepancies. Materials, we already covered that, and if you get any black or flickering pieces, perhaps you want to visit normals, where it actually shows you your normals and your tangents. And if it's not quite easy to see, I believe the default is set to 2. I increase that to 5, or you can increase it to 10 and inspect those. You can recompute sharp edges if you want with a bit of a threshold in there, or you can target only tangents, which in that case is going to disable recompute sharp edges, and you go recompute, and you can see I'm getting a slightly different alignment for my normals. And if there is any glitch, you might be able to actually fix the glitch in your textures and in your destructed model using normals in utilities. Now, sometimes you want to export this as a static mesh, because we've already turned that or converted that into geometry collection. With that, you can have a copy. So to mesh, and what's going to happen, it says, well, we want to have this per bone. So pretty much everything that I've selected, you can center the pivot, place in world, and select new actor, which I usually turn off, and you go convert. A window pops up. Where do you want to save it? I'm going to save it here in my chaos, converted, save. It's going to save that geometry as a brand new static mesh. I've got all of these pieces, save selected. And now you may have noticed there's a flickering because, well, we asked the tool to place it here, and I have those pieces here. So we have actually created these pieces out of this guy, and now I have them as individual pieces, and I can scatter them in my scene if you want some static pieces to also go with this around your destruction. That's another trick up your sleeve that you can use in this particular scenario. Obviously, I don't really need that, so I am going to select all of these guys and I'm going to remove them. Just so you know, you still see individual pieces in your content drawer, so if you don't need them, make sure to delete them, because each one of them is going to be an actor that occupies your hard drive and your project directory eventually. The next one that is extremely useful is TinyGeo. So if I go ahead with this chaos destruction, and I'm going to apply another one here, and I'm gonna crank it up to 30 and 30 and fracture, that is going to generate 928 bones. So Shift B, and you can see I've got a very detailed type of fracture. Now, do we need all of that? Let me rephrase this. There might be some very tiny pieces that you don't even see, or they may not even show in your simulation. And TinyGeo is going to find them, and it's going to merge those tiny pieces into other bones. How useful is that? So I'm going to cancel out, making sure that everything is selected, and I'm going to go into TinyGeo. and look at those tiny pieces. Sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes you have a close-up, which in that case, that's totally okay. But one thing that you really want to pay attention to is relative volume, merge type, merge geometry, merge to, largest neighbors. The tool is going to merge or connect those tiny pieces into the big piece in the neighborhood around the geometry. And relative volume, the ratio is actually fairly low, which is good. You can go even lower, and it's going to pick smaller and smaller pieces. So something like 0.005 is actually a very good number. If I go and select something like 1, it's going to obviously remove half of my pieces. So I think that 0.005 is pretty good. Now, if I go into my fracture and look at my overall, it's 972. If I go merge, it's going to reduce everything into 923. Very useful when it comes to optimization. You can certainly benefit from that. Okay, that should really do the trick for all the basics in chaos and how to fracture the geometry, how to control your clusters, how to get closer to the optimization side of things. There is still plenty of things that I would like to talk about, including force field, including attaching Niagara system to create dust and smoke upon the collision. These are the things that you may find useful, and you may find that, yep, I really need to know how to use those and how to benefit from those techniques. So stay tuned. There will be another volume of this complete guide to chaos destruction, which I will walk you through. And at least for these 2 tutorials, I hope you found them useful and start using chaos destruction more often in your own projects. And thank you for your support. Until the next one, see you guys later.